What would be, I'd be interested, like a couple of kind of points, maybe like 2 or 3 points where we kind of set up, what do Muslims say about the Quran? And they're saying that it's, my understanding is they're saying it's, it was transmitted to Muhammad. It was communicated orally at first, and then it was eventually written down, perfectly preserved. And since that point, it's always been perfectly replicated, recorded, and we have the Quran. If I go into a shop today, I buy the Quran, and that Quran would be identical to the first Qurans that were written, and if I read them aloud, they would be orally identical to what was given to Muhammad. Now, the thing I've always thought about that is even then, like you were saying earlier, Phil, it's almost, it is completely subjective, because even if it was perfectly copied each time, I mean, that would almost be miraculous in and of itself. If you could perfectly copy a book by the human hand for 1,300 years, I mean, but that seems to me like the strongest case you have is like, well, it's a perfectly preserved book at its strongest. But
even if it is a perfectly preserved book, doesn't make it from the divine, doesn't make it from God.
Absolutely. Yeah. So what would maybe be 2 or 3 points that would kind of would show that narrative is not accurate?
2 very simple ways, because it's quite obviously has a lot of, it can be quite complex, and it can be a bit daunting when you first go into this area of study. But I think what's really helpful, just in a conversation with my Muslim friends, I just ask them, well, what are your dates? First of all, look at dates and then just do a comparison. So let's start with the dates. The traditional story is that you have the Quran, and sort of by of course, Muhammad dies 632. I mean, that's the date that you sort of judge everything up against. And then within 20 years or so, 22 years, you have this completed Quran compiled by Uthman, the 3rd Caliph. And so this perfect, wonderful Quran has been compiled, and it's never changed since that time. Well, first of all, why is it that the first Qurans that we have in existence today don't really begin to appear to at least 60 years later, if not more? Why is it that the Quran that they use today, it doesn't actually, it cannot be based on those earliest Qurans that we have? So we have some big, monumental, huge Qurans, not we personally, but in certain libraries and so on. And as they've done a study on those Qurans, they're not the same as the Quran they use today. So where did the Quran come from that they use today? Based on what manuscript? So those early manuscripts don't agree. The Quran they use today doesn't agree with those early manuscripts. So where does the Quran today come from? When was it canonized? When it affirmed as the Quran that everyone should use? Does every country in the world accept one Quran, and so on? So you have that, but also the dates of those earliest Qurans. So the one that's in Istanbul, the one that's in Tashkent, in Cairo, the one that's in the British Library, for example, those early Qurans are too late. They're not from the time of Uthman. And they can, academics can look at the scripts, they can look at, even Dan Brubaker has done a great study where they're looking at how there's obvious changes, there's been things erased out of the Quran. You can get his book, which is an excellent book, just looking at some of the simple changes that even a novice can look at and see, oh yeah, there really is changes there. And wait a minute, that's actually not the same as the Quran that they're using today. So just by simple comparison, modern day Quran with the ancient Qurans, and then today's Arabic Qurans, there's multiple different versions out there, and then the dates don't add up. And that, to a historian, they just begin to think, so we should have a Quran from about AD 650, 52, say. Uthman compiled it all together under Uthmanic, the Uthmanic rules called the Uthmanic recension. And the earliest scholars who are studying these earliest Qurans, like the one in Topkapi, those Muslim scholars have admitted that Topkapi Quran is not the Uthmanic. Now, what Muslim scholars will say is there is an Uthmanic recension, but we just don't know where it is. But all of this doesn't add up to the traditional story. So if the Quran was set in stone, perfect, unchanged, why are the earliest 6 or more Qurans in existence today from 60 to 100 to 150 years after Muhammad died? Why do those earliest Qurans not agree with each other? And now we've got resources out there that people can go look it up for themselves. And that's what's really super exciting.
So, sorry, just one more thing. Sorry, Phil. There we go. So what do Muslims say in response to that? So obviously you can bring those points up. Now, if they really do have that, that's genuine. They think what you're saying, about it being perfectly preserved, that's what they believe. Then how do they respond to that? I mean, what have been some of the responses?
So for some, it's brand spanking new, and multiple responses. Some will just say you're lying, and that they can say that. But now that there are resources that are being developed by multiple people, so you've got Arabic speakers working on a team with Jay Smith in America. You have the online, and I wish I could remember the name of it, from Andy Bannister and others. And is it John Brubaker? Let me just see if I've got it.
We can always add a link in at the end as well.
Yeah,
we can.
You've got some excellent work done. I think it's John Brubaker who's done excellent work on this. And what can be helpful is actually getting John Brubaker's little book. And on the front cover is one of those old Qurans, and it shows that there's been changes just by looking at the scripts. You don't need to be an academic or have even done a deep study. You just literally need to look at the pictures that are in his book. So that's a very helpful book to have. And it just means that you can say, hey, these are from the earliest Qurans. Look, they don't agree with the Quran you use today, and they don't even agree with each other. And that's just starts the conversation. And it just helps people to see, okay, this idea that we have this preserved perfect Quran, there's some real questions around it. So now we need to start thinking this through and realizing where did our religion come from? Where did this Quran come from? I was once speaking to a Muslim missionary. He was brand new to the country. He was from Pakistan. And he even told me, I've come to England with my wife to be a missionary. Now, this is back in the days, over a decade ago, I used to go to Speaker's Corner, and I happened to have, because I'm a bit of a nerd that way, copy of the top cuppa, one of those earliest Qurans in my bag. And he was saying that the Quran is perfect. The Bible's been changed. The Quran is perfect. And I said, well, can I show you what some Muslim scholars who have looked at one of your earliest Qurans say about that early Quran? This is the one from Turkey. So I pulled it out as a beast of a book, and I opened up the pages to where the actual Turkish Muslim academics have done this study, and they admit some of the problems with the Quran in the front introduction parts of that book. And I remember just watching him, and his eyes filled up with tears. And I just said to him, I know this is really difficult to read, especially if you've believed since you were a child that this is a perfect book that's preserved and on the tablets of heaven, or at least has been given down to Muhammad and it's perfect and so on. And I know this is difficult reading, but you just cannot make that claim that it's a perfect, unchanged book. You really do have to look and see that there's a history in this book. It's evolved. There's been changes in theology, and there are changes between those earliest Qurans. It took over 100 to 200 years to develop, and so on. And the Quran used today doesn't agree with those earliest Qurans, which means you've just got to start asking some questions. So for him, it was shocking, but that's okay. I don't want to hurt him, but at the same time, if it gets him thinking, and then he starts thinking, hang on a minute, let's really seek who God actually is and how does he communicate with us? He doesn't just communicate in books. God communicates in person. God himself communicates with us. Then that moves them to start thinking about the Lord Jesus and so on. So different responses.
So what if a Muslim just said that, well, that the meaning of the text is not changed? So perhaps, I know it was the earliest Quran's a Kufic script. So sometimes, I can't remember, is it diacritic notches, in Arabic? Yeah, they're in different places or things like that in some of the different versions.
So the thing is, the wordings have changed. And one of the things I think Dan Brubaker's book helps to look at, and some of these online resources you can now look at, the meaning has changed. That's the thing. The meaning really has changed. And one typical one that many use, and some people say, well, it's not really big difference. There's one where it talks about either you're doing the killing or you're the one being killed. And I've heard Muslims say, well, that's not much of a change. I'm going, I'm the murderer or I'm being murdered. I mean, there is quite a big difference there. It has a big impact on my life.
Yeah.
So, but it's much more than that. It's whole portions of the Quran are not in the earliest Quran. So portions that are in the Quran today, even whole chapters or chunks of chapters that are in the Quran today are not in those earliest Qurans. And that's quite significant.
So with that, I've heard one response, which was, I think actually he was quoting, it might have been Brubaker, but it was just a YouTube, one of the Dawah team has got thousands of followers. His 3.5 minute response or something, it's very short, was basically, well, go to the local imam, find a certificate for recitation of the Quran. That certificate takes him all the way back to Muhammad. So it doesn't really matter about the words of the Quran. It's preserved orally and has been preserved perfectly that way.
I've heard many Muslims say that, and I've heard many say that what we recite is the same as what was recited, in the early years. Well, how would you know? I mean, that is just a claim out of thin air. How would you know? There is no. It's just you can't even come to that conclusion. And which recitation are they reciting? Is it the recitation of that student? Because what we know of the early sort of compilation of the Qurans, there were multiple schools of thought and students. So you have different leaders and students under those leaders, and the Qurans have come from those different schools of thought. So which recitation and which part of the world? That's the other thing. The traditional story says everything starts in Mecca and Medina. Well, all the archaeology and all the inscriptions and all the earliest findings that as they're reading, even the actual stories from Islam itself is pointing to much more north than the actual even geographical location that Muslims traditionally say Islam started in. And so everything's pointing to different locations. It's pointing to a language of Arabic that wasn't even advanced enough to contain the Quran that is now the Quran today, that the Arabic language had to evolve to accommodate the Quran that's used today. When they look at the earliest Qurans, if they say it's recitation, the problem is that you have different Qurans that are different sizes, and somewhere whole portions are not even in those earliest Qurans. So it's not even about recitation. It's not even about accent. It is about whole portions of the Quran are different. You just can't get away from it. And now that these passages of the Quran are out in the public sphere that anyone can access, this is an investigation that we all can begin to look into, whether we go into it as a professional or just because we're quite interested to